I'm assuming after the interview, Adam just went like this, scooped up all of his watches, threw them over on the chair, and was like, so, what are you doing after this? Enough about watches, Ben. Ben's like, I gotta go.
The guy has literally spent millions of dollars on watches, and maybe one of the biggest players is basically a fake watch, a fake Rolex.
And not one fake Rolex, two fake Rolex. Oh. And when there's two fake Rolexes, there's probably three.
More fake Rolexes. Poor Adam Levine. Although, you know what? Not poor Adam Levine. I'd rather be Adam Levine with a couple fake watches, financially, than Christian Cerrone with a bunch of real watches.
This is the watch I wore to the Super Bowl. We're like, that poor guy doesn't even know.
That poor bastard doesn't know. What an idiot.
You and I drinking tea, being like, are you kidding me? Look at that
Talk
bezel.
about egg in your face.
My favorite part about this entire scandal is if you look at the Instagram posts where this was kind of revealed, the top comment there is, you think the guy who walks in and buys a nice, simple, all-steel day date Oyster is the same guy who knows to replace a bezel with a fake to keep it safe.
Who'll explain exactly what that means a little bit later, but Adam Levine just went on Talking Watches, a Hodinkee video series, and showed off his collection. It was a very cool video. I actually like Adam Levine quite a bit. We'll talk all about that, later. Not the music so much, but he's cool, And he showed off his watch collection, and watch collectors, watch experts online took a slightly closer look than Adam and found out that there's actually quite a bit wrong with his watches.
Yes.
Not that they've been damaged, but the fact, rather that they're just not real, which is wild because it's very clear if you watch the video that Adam Levine does not know this, right? Oh, Adam Levine is not, he's uber rich, right?
If you could see, it's at his house. If you look through the eye line of the shot, you see that his yard is longer than a street.
It's insane.
It's huge.
It's insane. So he's uber rich. He can afford virtually any watch that he wants. No, he can afford any watch that he wants. Yeah, period. Because watches aren't that much money.
Sunday morning rain is calling.
Yeah. He can afford basically any watch he wants, and yet he has what seems to be been clearly taken advantage of by a vintage watch dealer. We cannot speak in absolutes on this issue,
yes.
But we can speak with a fairly high degree of certainty, just using kind of common critical thinking here. Again, this is a wild scandal, and it's not the first time this has happened on Hodinkee's Talking Watches.
But what we are seeing now is there being a bit of a scuffle when someone says this watch isn't real. It's not straightforward anymore.
Well, that's the thing. If I committed a fraud on someone, no. If you committed a fraud on someone...
You would never.
Well, no. No. If you committed a fraud on someone and they didn't know, and I told them, hey, that may be fraud, you or one of your buddies is going to be the first person to jump in the middle and say, whoa, you're way out of your depth. You don't know what you're talking about.
Right. I have to discredit the guy.
Exactly.
Which is what we're starting to see happen.
Which seems to be exactly what's happening. Okay, what are the two watches...
Who are you?
Who am I?
Yeah.
No, I'm Christian. I'm Christian, the curator of the Theo and Harris Vintage Watch Shop.
My name is Michael. This video is sponsored by Keeps.
More on Keeps a little bit later. I'm wearing a beautiful Cartier Santos Carré today.
Me too.
This watch is not available in the Theo and Harris Watch Shop, but other beautiful Cartiers and Rolexes and Omegas are.
Yes.
So go ahead and take a look. Zenith. Love Zenith.
Zenith Revival Shadow.
Yeah. I've been really into Zenith for a while, looking to maybe pick up a Blue Defy for a while.
Yeah, you're really into Zenith. You got me into Zenith.
I got you into Zenith right around the time I got you into denim.
Yeah, exactly.
And your girlfriend.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, let's backtrack a little bit.
Yes.
Okay.
Let's run through it all.
This is certainly not the first time a similar fraud has happened. This video is sponsored by our friends over at Keeps.
Keeps is an online subscription service that helps men keep their hair with expert recommended hair loss treatments.
They offer clinically proven treatment to combat symptoms of hair loss delivered straight to your door.
Treatment plans are affordable. They're typically half the price that you'd get at a pharmacy.
Yep.
And all treatment plans are personalized authorized and recommended by a licensed medical provider.
While I am not losing my hair, at least yet,
Same.
if I were, I would want the 24/7 support that Keeps offers.
And if I was technically losing my hair, I would want proven results, and I would want to see results within the first 6 months.
Which is exactly what Keeps offers.
Exactly. So whether you're looking to prevent hair loss, stimulate growth, or just take better care of your hair in general, Keeps has you totally covered. So if that's something that you're thinking about, which you definitely should if you're losing your hair, because it stressed me out for a while before I was taking anything or taking any action in general, you should definitely check out Keeps, because hair loss stops with Keeps. And to get a special offer, go to keeps.com/Theo Harris or click the link in the description. That is keeps.com/Theo Harris.
Vintage watches are, especially vintage expensive, collectible watches, they're incredibly nuanced and historically based,
Yes,
right?
yes.
But there is reference material online, but it's not that easily accessible, and it's quite hard to reference check to verify if something is fake or real. Why? Well, because vintage watches, mostly Rolex,
Yes.
aren't that hard to fake, because the watches themselves were never pieces of artisanal craft. Right? They were just kind of simple, good tool watches made of steel, and they weren't all that, finished to like this incredible degree.
Right.
They're just parts. They're just parts, right? They were, I don't know what the car equivalent. It was like a Camry in many ways, right?
Very
Like,
true.
not exactly, but like kind of.
If I got a Camry from 40 years ago, there's very few people that would be like, that's fake because this, because that, because that.
exactly.
But all of a sudden, if old Camrys were worth $500,000, all of a sudden, maybe that muffler's not real. Your tires are off. This is off.
Exactly. So we don't see this level of fraud in categories like Patek, but in categories like Rolex, we do. Right? It's just easier to fake.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
Now, again, not the first time we've seen this. There was a big problem years back between John Mayer, who was one of the godfathers of vintage watch collecting in the public sphere,
Yep.
and his dealer of choice, whose name is Bob Maroon. We don't really know how that ended. It ended outside of court. The story is very convoluted, but ultimately, as it turns out, John Mayer did buy watches that the vintage watch community and expert community do believe to be altered, fake, Franken, not original, in a nutshell. Okay? Mm-hmm. He paid millions of dollars for these watches, millions, and then he went back to the dealer and sued him for fraud. I have heard that he ultimately did not win.
Wow.
I have been told a couple of stories. They all kind of align. The opposing party had quite a bit of strength behind them legally, and that's it, right? It was kind of the infancy of vintage watch collecting in the public sphere, and courts I don't think understand, all of this. The experts they would call, half of them are frauds themselves. It was very, very difficult.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But the watches were certainly not kosher.
They were not blessed by rabbis.
They were not blessed by rabbis. Yes. Okay. On talking watches, John Mayer went on, and several of his watches were called out for being, if not Franken, fraudulent.
This is a long time ago.
Yeah, 8 years ago.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What does Franken mean? Franken can mean that it is not necessarily a fake part, but the part is not correct to the watch. Franken can also mean, that it can also be a nice way to say it actually has fraudulent pieces,
exactly.
Right? But Franken is kind of a loose term. It can go either way, but it certainly doesn't mean correct. If something is Franken, it is not kosher.
That's not, right. Not blessed by a rabbi.
Exactly. Fast forward years later, and now we have Adam Levine, another basically pop, star of the same era, also tattooed, kind of very like the same kind of vein.
Yeah.
Seems to be like the archetype of the guy, or the guy that dealers rip off.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Dealers are like, hey, you
Whoa.
look just like my last it's like Jeffrey Dahmer knew exactly who he was targeting.
The dealer that John Mayer and Adam Levine keeps calling the wrong one by accident.
Yeah.
Sorry. John, you know about the fraud now. I'm going to call Adam.
Yeah. He looks just like.
Yeah.
So Adam Levine goes on Talking Watches and shows off a couple of watches, maybe 5 watches. Don't hold me to it. And
yeah.
2 of the watches, very quickly, within 24 hours, probably within 12 hours, were subject to great criticism from watch experts. Okay.
To which I will say,
Yep.
You can tell based off of how Adam Levine is talking about watches, especially one we'll get into in a second, he doesn't have the same amount of interest as John Mayer. Mm-hmm. Much easier to take advantage of.
John Mayer is also, super poetic and intelligent.
Yes, yes.
And, I'm not saying that Adam's not poetic or intelligent. It's just that you're right. I mean, his passion definitely
He
shines
seems to
through.
like one style of Rolex.
Right.
Buy that a lot. But it's clear that he's not a guy that's going down every single rabbit hole. When even though John Mayer got taken advantage of, he did seem like a guy that was like, oh, I gotta look at this, I gotta look at that, I gotta look at
Exactly.
this. Adam Levine seems much more casual.
Exactly, which frankly, right, it's the casual, rich, unsuspecting, unintelligent, or uneducated buyer is a prime target for fraud, right?
Yeah.
That's exactly who you want to rip off if you're going to rip somebody off.
I like the
right?
Paul Newman style. What else do you have?
What else do you have?
Oh, give me a month, I'll get you 6.
And if I rob you, if it becomes a nuisance enough, you may just drop it.
Yeah, right.
Because it doesn't mean anything financially.
Right.
It's just like whatever.
You're not a watch nerd, you're
I guess
a watch
I'm not going to
appreciator.
buy another one from you.
Yeah, right.
But am I going to really fight
And
you
even
over the
then,
5 million?
I don't really care.
Exactly. I actually
Right.
like it.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly.
And it's very easy for the person to write off the argument as, oh, that's a little too nerdy for me.
Yeah.
So where are the points of contention? Okay. First, on his Paul Newman, you see pushers that are clearly not original.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
These pushers are. I mean, they're just clearly.
They're horrendous.
They don't look at all like Rolex factory screw down crowns.
They look like Lego heads.
They do. They just don't have the same. They don't have the same shape. So that was a pretty easy one to spot. That was like
Yeah, that doesn't look right.
obvious.
Yeah.
The second, once there's one issue, right, people start to look even closer for another because, well, what are the odds it only has one issue?
And those little things, like when there's a glaring issue, those little things that you're like, well, you can chalk that up to inconsistency between Rolex at this era and stuff like that. All of a sudden, you're like, nah, that's wrong.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
So then, and we should say that one of the largest voices that criticize these watches, one of the largest voices in the watch industry that call out fraud, is Perezcope on Instagram, who I like quite a bit.
Which we'll get into that.
We'll get into that later.
Whole thing in a second.
So he also pointed out the inconsistent, or rather the
Perfection.
the lack of the such insignificant likelihood that a dial could be so perfect. This doesn't happen in vintage Rolex.
Especially with Loom.
Loom plots.
Loom explodes, Loom burns,
Exactly.
Loom moves. Loom is not really ever perfect from that era. So seeing perfect Loom is the weird part.
It's a red flag.
Exactly.
Exactly. Then we took a step further. People online took a step further, and Perezcope promoted the fake bezel.
Yes.
Okay, which again was not even subject to debate. That is stipulated at this point by all experts that is fraudulent, just like the crown.
But
the
where-
dial is subject to debate, but I believe that
Some
Perezcope is
debate,
correct.
which we'll get into in a little
Yep.
bit, but the debate of the bezel is where things get really, really fishy that we'll talk about later, because
Yep.
that is why I brought up the fact that John Mayer seems like a very, very nerdy guy.
Mm-hmm.
Adam Levine does not, which discredits this theory about why the bezel would be different.
Exactly. Get into that in just a minute. Now, the other Daytona, which was a gold Daytona, non-Paul Newman, non-exotic dial, also had the same problem with the bezel.
It came out later.
It came out later, which is crazy. The hits just keep on coming.
Yeah.
So the first, there are a series of questions we should ask, right? Number one, does Adam Levine know? And we'll get into the larger answer later, but I would say no.
I would say he has no idea.
I would say he has no idea.
I would also say that his care of that is probably even less than he knows.
Second, could you, maybe Ben just doesn't give a shit.
Well,
But Ben saw that. Ben is a vintage watch.
You've met Ben a bunch. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I've met Ben in passing. But we're not friends.
Did we have a few nights in Paris together?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Would I say I know the guy?
Have we ever
No.
made love below Tory Fell? Fine.
Yes, but who hasn't?
Who
with Ben
hasn't?
Clymer?
Come on. So the point is, I feel very strongly that Ben Clymer, the founder of Hodinkee, one of the leading voices in the watch industry, and particularly in the vintage watch world, knew.
I have a
as soon as
feeling-
he saw the pusher. Maybe the dial could have swept by, but the pusher, he must have said,
No close-ups, guys.
"Do I
Keep the
have
close-ups.
to? Do I have to?"
Toss a diffusion filter on the glass, please.
Come on, come on. Which does lead me to another.
This is
question.
a big discussion I want to talk about with Hodinkee in that lens too.
This isn't the first time this has happened to Hodinkee or anybody. God, this could happen to anybody, right?
Right.
It's not the first time. When it's happened to us with fingernails. It's a great example, right? You show up to a shoot when you're trying to deliver certain points with clients. You do want to show hand movement. You want to show some level of motion.
Sure.
Just the same way you want to show certain profiles, right? And fingernails are a point that we actually have to go out of our way now on projects to specifically say, make sure your fingernails are cleaned, manicured, kept well, and are going to just present well on camera.
Yeah.
Now that's not always. You can't always do that when you're dealing with something dirty, like a jeweler that's polishing. There's always going to be soot, but even soot is not offensive. It's the long, dirty fingernails. We've seen this. You'd be surprised how many executives and people that should be people that should be clean, they're not. Okay, my hands are going like that, so I had to do it. It's amazing.
Yucky.
When you show up to a shoot, you don't know what's going to be there.
Yeah.
You definitely have to confront a bunch of curveballs. And a Franken watch is certainly one of them.
Yes.
I just don't understand why the Hodinkee team rather, doesn't say, let's pre-agree to the watches you're showing so we can develop or we can put forth, a narrative different from some of the other content we have coming out soon. And when a watch is clearly Franken, don't even fucking tell the guy if you don't want to get into it, because maybe it's going to sour the relationship. Just say, let's choose these 4. I think Hodinkee definitely has the power to say, let's focus on these 4. There will be no overlap with other episodes coming out soon.
Or frankly, you're going to look like an idiot if this one is in there.
I know, but it's just like, maybe you don't want to piss off Adam Levine.
Well, that's what I mean. There's such a delicate line of like, Adam, what watches do you want to show off? These. And it's like, okay, do we tell them that they're not real and not work with Adam?
Don't lead with the question. You say, send your watch collection, send us photos. We'll pick 4. Okay, and we'll have a call leading up and whatever. We'll send you over information if you feel uncomfortable with the knowledge. Like, don't worry, we want to hear your story. This is about your story. This isn't about historical education. It's about your story. Why do you have this watch? What interested about it?
Yeah.
That's what they should be doing.
Because the 2, I'm thinking they're looking at the list, say that's all of his watches, which I'm assuming it's not. They take away the 2 Daytonas, the 2 Paul Newmans. Then all of a sudden they're like, is this what we show? Do we want more?
I know. It's fucked up.
It's a tough spot.
It's a tough spot.
Because then I was thinking, of course, there has to be some thing said or shown by Hodinkee to notify, because it's a big deal. But then the other thing I'm like is, what do you do in that situation? And then if a brand is profiting off of this, and not necessarily Hodinkee, whoever, what is your responsibility knowing that the internet is going to rip you apart, rip Adam apart, and go from there?
That's tough.
Because there's been, I won't bring them up in this video, there's been much worse examples of this where we're showing off a watch that is fake and then we're selling it for a lot of money.
Right. We've seen that in the watch industry too many times. The Rolex Unicorn being the most famous, I think, example.
Yeah.
A watch that was auctioned off by Philips that, it just had an entire history of replacement parts, fake parts even, that was not disclosed at the time of sale, even though that information certainly was known by the sellers. Okay.
I'm assuming after the interview, Adam just went like this, scooped up all of his watches, threw them over on the chair, and was like, so what are you doing after this? Enough about watches, Ben.
Ben's like, I gotta go. I don't actually like Maroon 5.
As he throws the watches and looks back over, Ben's gone. The whole crew's gone.
Ben's gone.
Adam doesn't even know if it happened.
100%. I mean, even who, we pride ourselves on, right, transparency and trying to call out bullshit where we see it. And God,
recently I wanted to call out something on this channel.
Exactly. And it's really hard because you don't want to create enemies, especially when you're, relatively speaking, normal people like we are. You don't need a really, really rich group of guys, in a system shooting you down. You just don't need that. So I love to have a drink and call out bullshit, call out fraud, and I do it, but it is scary, which is one of the reasons why we created the podcast community that we've got over at The Zero. You can check out the link down in our description below, where we release podcasts every week, and when things come up, when fraud comes up, and I spoke about it with John Buckley pretty recently, who's a famous vintage watch dealer, gives us a great insight into the vintage watch market. We spoke about fraud, and we did name names, and we did name, real issues, whether it's blueberry bezels or whether it's fake GMT, all these different fake watches, prototype dials, things that are arguably places where fraud was committed. But we can be a little bit more honest, right, in our podcast
Because those guys aren't going to pay $10.
Exactly. It's a closed wall. You can get in, of course, but a lot of people, aren't just going to share it to someone and rat us out. Of course they could. And if they do, that's life. But I feel a little bit safer over there. So I hope that you guys do go sign up for our podcast at the Zero. Again, it's not free, but we give you guys so many credits that it basically is free over the year. And
yes.
I hope to see you guys over there. So anyway, so now let's get into the major point that you wanted to bring up, which is, and I'll tee you up and then you bring it home.
Sure.
And, one of the defenses for the fake, objectively fake bezel insert, this acrylic bezel insert, one of the defenses, one of the other scenarios that paves a pathway for, it's possible, right? It paves a possibility that he was not defrauded, okay, but rather this is a replacement bezel which he has put on his watch intentionally, because acrylic bezels do have a nasty habit of breaking if you're wearing them hard, you're wearing them on stage, you're wearing them around, and they're worth, thousands and thousands of dollars. I've never bought an acrylic bezel, but you could pay $20,000-$30,000 for certain bezels. Okay.
Yeah.
So that is possible, right? That can happen. I've heard that with Rolex GMT original references, the 6542, which is originally made of Bakelite. Okay. Yeah. This plastic material. It does break, and a lot of people say, it's an asset that I don't want to ruin. Because once I ruin it, it's gone.
I can get a cheap plastic bezel that looks the exact same.
Exactly.
And wear it all the time.
And I'll keep the original at home to retain value. There's nothing wrong with that. I would probably actually do that, right? I mean...
Yeah, right.
Because if I bought a $30,000 bezel, that'd be a lot of money to me. It wouldn't
That is no longer being made. That's a piece of history, whatever.
Exactly.
The big point here is the way you're talking is how I would assume John Mayer would talk about his watch if he got it. The big faux pas in this video was that Adam Levine says to Ben, which I cut him some slack for because obviously he performs in front of a lot of people frequently, but when it comes to watch knowledge, it's very easy to put your foot in your mouth.
Yes.
613, oh no, I'm at 614, like you can do that very easy.
100%.
But Adam says, the first watch I had was, it was like steel, oyster, I think he said it was an oyster steel day date, oyster steel day date, and then it immediately cuts to Ben, who's going like this, and it cuts back,
which does not exist, right? Rolex never made a steel day date in their catalog or released in their catalog, still production. There is supposedly one steel day date in existence. Maybe if that's real at all, maybe there are a couple of prototypes. That's possible. Yeah. That is possible that exists.
But the fact that with you saying it that way, my first watch is probably not the.
It definitely was not.
Yeah, exactly.
If those prototypes exist, that wasn't Adam Levine's first watch, because that would have been a point of the conversation, right?
I own one of the rarest Rolexes
of all time. Exactly. Yeah. So he made a little bit of a flub. Okay, he said he called a day date steel, and I don't think a watch. Like a guy that's like, the point is, we don't think that the guy that uses a replacement bezel intentionally to preserve the value of his watch, if the guy that into watches would have made the flub about the steel dating.
It's essentially like some guy being like, oh yeah, I love Rolex. You the Rolex guy? Yeah. I have a superlative chronometer. And you're like, cool. Oh, cool. What do you say at that point? Right. That guy is primed to getting ripped off. If all of a sudden there is brimmings of fraud happening, people are going to start jumping in. If someone's saying that watch is... Well, it happened to us before. I sent you the wrong serial number on a watch. A watch forum exploded.
That's right.
I thought it was an 8 or something. It was an E.
That's right.
I jump in immediately. You told me about it, but then I jump in. I'm like, that's me. I'm so sorry. Like I couldn't see it well.
Right.
So that starts to happen. So that bezel discussion happens, and then it kind of got destroyed in the comments pretty quickly. People being like, "Come on, like look at this guy." Is it really? But then the argument goes, okay, well the dial. We're looking at the lume. It has been that perfect before. I have seen watches from this era that have perfect lume. How could you possibly prove that? You're being overzealous. You're trying to do this. You're trying to do that. It
also, again, we have to look at the way people are speaking, the way people are commenting, the defenders of these watches, right? Maybe one person that I saw come out in opposition to the allegations that these watches are pieced together or fraudulent, right? The people whose contention is that these watches are kosher came out with a certain level of vitriol. Right?
Yes.
They
I'll
showed
reference
up.
something specific
They showed
in a
up with a little bit of nastiness, and so far as I see it, a level of certainty that makes me uncomfortable. Okay, a level of certainty that makes me feel like this doesn't seem very educational. It seems like you have a horse in the race.
And starting off with basically saying you're wrong. Stop. Relax.
Exactly.
Right.
And getting a little bit, for lack of a better word, like it was. And as soon as you hear that kind of language come out, I, as Perezcope, would say you might as well just admit you have a hand in this, because that's what it sounds like.
Yeah, right. It's going to tag you really fast.
You know what I mean?
And where we noticed this, this is where I really want to hear your thoughts on this, is someone commented and said, whether it's fake or not, I don't agree with this comment, but you shouldn't be posting it online. You should privately email Adam Levine and say all this, whatever it may be.
I fundamentally disagree with
you. But wait. But that person that was responding rather intensely all the time immediately posts 3 clapping emojis right under it, basically being like, here, that's correct. That's what a gentleman does. And that, to me...
That's what a gentleman does. They hide fraud.
If I was a lawyer, I'd be like, these emojis should not be there.
You're right.
And the whole jury would be like, yeah, he's right. That's pretty petty.
Wow, what a legal argument.
It's not right. Yeah, that's what they'd say to me, too. How come you weren't a lawyer? But that to me is, I was like, that's not the discussion we're having.
Exactly.
So, what are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are that's ridiculous, right? We should always have a gentleman or a gentlewoman's demeanor, a kind and educational kind of approach. Everyone has a right to be nasty, of course. I don't think it's nice. That I will criticize.
Perezcope writes a little bit like TMZ as well.
But it's a little bit like TMZ, and it's a little bit rough, but it's not nasty. He didn't go in the comment section and call Adam Levine stupid and kind of belittle him or bully him, right? Which again is within your right. Like, you can do that.
And frankly, Adam Levine,
you have the right to do that.
Adam Levine is, I'd assume, the victim. He's not trying to flip these watches or anything like that.
Exactly.
I have a feeling, even possibly, which is a lot more innocent, but also not at the same time, the dealer may have been like, listen, I can get you the factually correct watch. Right. It costs this much. Do you want me to just do this? And Adam's like, oh yeah, 500. It looks the exact same. Sure.
Right. I think that, so long as Perezcope did not, the allegations were, fairly definitive. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And when you're going to not raise questions, but be somewhat definitive, actually make an allegation, you better be sure.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah. Because if you're not sure and you're being irresponsible and you're you haven't really met a proper burden to say fraud, then I think that you are acting irresponsibly and frankly immorally, because you are jeopardizing someone else's livelihood, right? The dealer that sold that watch has a reputation to uphold. Yeah, so you better fucking know. It's almost like, like in The Wire, like if you say someone's a rat, you better have paperwork. Yeah. You know what I mean? I want to see paperwork, because that guy's going to get killed, right? In a different world, it's the same exact thing. Well, right? You better be sure.
Tell us about Perezcope's why we trust him more, because we didn't really outline that.
Perezcope is a watch expert. He's an expert in vintage Rolex, expert in vintage Panerai. I believe that those. And I don't know if he's an expert in vintage Patek, but he knows enough of patterns to and knows where to call bullshit on certain frauds.
He did it with Omega too.
Exactly, with Omega as well. Actually, he's quite a bit of an expert in vintage Omega. So the point is, Perezcope has been relied upon, this Jose has been relied upon by multiple auction houses for years as one of the people that vet watches before they go to auction. But it seems as if, and this story gets very long and very large, but it seems as if even when he would raise issue with watches, they would still somehow find their way to auction. Yeah, so it reminds me of like when corporations pay for certain sensitivity trainings, just to say in case they're sued, well, we have this guy on staff. We just spent $185,000 to this, person. Right. We can't be frauds. We care very much about, whatever, Yeah. I don't think his words were listened to very often. Okay. But his expertise was never really brought into question.
And what happened is, in that same vein, what I think these auction houses probably said to him, in maybe a more polite way, but he called out Panerai, called out Omega, called out this, called out that, finally called out this watch. The comment of that person that was really kind of fighting him, that was just the rudest thing you could possibly say to discredit him was like, "You're out of your league. Stick to Panerai."
Right.
What?
Rude.
Well, yeah.
Rude. Don't again, that's talking down, right? I mean, that's trying to put someone in a box. And
It's trying to discredit you to everybody that reads. Like, okay, you got Panerai. Stick to that. I'm the
How dare you?
Yeah, right.
How dare you? Tell me why I'm wrong.
Yeah, right.
Don't just tell me to stick to what I know. What you think I know. Don't be. You see my point,
Yeah,
right?
Of course.
So anyway, I as I usually do, or almost always do, believe Perezcope. I think that there in the super high-end vintage watch game, just like in the high-end vintage art game, just the same way as cars, all of these spaces, watches are not immune to not just fraud, but systemic fraud. There are people that have been controlling this industry for decades that have been, they've been not just complicit, but I think that they've been drivers behind fraud, right? They haven't just seen it; they have participated in it and made millions in it.
Yeah.
And I think for a long time, no one said anything, and then someone like Perezcope has come forward and kind of been this whistleblower, right?
Yeah.
Kind of said, "Well, fuck you and fuck you and fuck you." I don't, I'm not taking
Everybody
your
has
money,
platforms
right?
now.
Exactly.
Yep.
So I'm going to call out fraud where I see it. I'm going to be a man of the people. It's fascinating stuff.
It really is.
And I don't, poor Adam Levine. Although, you know what? Not poor Adam Levine. I'd rather be Adam Levine with a couple fake watches financially than Christian Cerrone with a bunch of real watches.
This is the watch I wore to the Super Bowl. We're like, that poor guy doesn't even know.
That poor bastard
doesn't
doesn't
even
know. What an idiot.
You and I drinking tea, being like, "Are you kidding me? Look at that
Talk
bezel."
about egg in your face. See, okay.
I honestly, if I had to chalk it up to something, he probably doesn't know, but if he did, I'm assuming the dealer was like, "Listen, I'll put this bezel, you'll save a ton of money." And he's like, "Cool." And he's like, "And no one will ever know the difference." So Adam's like, "Of course I'll go on the show. No one's ever going to know."
Maybe. Who knows?
That's the most innocent explanation. You know what I mean?
You know where there's no... to admit guilt here is to say nothing.
Of course.
Right?
Yeah.
If Adam Levine or Hodinkee or whatever, if there isn't an innocent explanation, or rather, if there is an innocent explanation, there will be a statement. There will be.
Yes.
If there is not, it is because they just couldn't coordinate one because there was fraud, and there will not be a statement, and it will all get brushed under the rug. And it's this beautiful opportunity for Hodinkee, who I think I think started doing real journalism on like real journalism that matters culturally in the watch community, right? I think that Hodinkee recently released an article that was actually culturally positive. Right? It was educational and it was positive to the culture and our understanding of vintage watches. I think that this sort of article, which I'll get into in a second, would create an environment at scale of more transparency and just more honesty. We become so afraid of restoration, so afraid of replacement parts, which is ridiculous, right? This is totally accepted in the world of vintage cars.
I was going to say, Hodinkee would be doing their part to push the watch, because they have the name, push the watch world into the same sphere as the car world.
Exactly.
Which is like, it's a restoration, but that's all right.
And that's all right. And it's still worth millions of dollars because it's great, right?
Yes.
And the example was, they did an article about this 1920s Cartier Cintre, one of my favorite, Cartier models. I actually have one at home.
Wow. You have this one, right?
No, I don't have that one. That was restored in the 90s or the 2000s.
1999.
By Cartier. So this watch is not original, right? This watch was properly restored.
And you can tell.
It's properly restored, and you can tell, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? That is, it just means the story is slightly longer, right? It's not just a little, it's 1920s Cartier. No,
you took a destroyed watch to a functioning watch.
Right. In a respectful, beautiful way. There's nothing wrong with that.
From the brand. You can't get better than that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that this sort of journalism, and I'll use that word, right? Represents a positive change in the industry, right? And I think that consistent with this sort of logic, this effort, would be Hodinkee or someone, or Adam Levine, or someone getting an exclusive interview or something addressing what looks like fraud.
Not to mention the PR that would bring.
Unbelievable.
If they did an update or something like that.
It's unbelievable.
Oh my God.
So that's it. But unfortunately, right, like all things, right, assuming this is fraud, assuming fraud took place, whose interest is it? In whose interest would it be to expose the fraud? Because if you expose the fraud, you have to expose
everything.
The fraud, the person that did it, the person that perpetrated.
And that goes back to a bigger web, which goes to, you're right.
Exactly. So anyway, that's Watches and Fraud and Adam Levine.
Anyways, that's Watches, guys.
That's Watches and Fraud and Adam Levine. So that's it. Did you guys like this episode? Like the actual episode. If you love watches, subscribe to our channel. And if you'd like more of our watch content, go down below and click the link to our podcast at The Zero and join our community. It's not free. It's $9 a month, but we give you a ton of credits into the leather shop. So you're getting free straps and things like that. So it ends up being free over the course of the year. And that's it. I'd love to see you guys over there. Shoot me a DM over at The Zero if you do sign up, and we'll chat. I can't answer all the YouTube comments, but I can engage over there. It is, while it's growing and it's big, it's a smaller community, so it's feasible. So I hope to see you guys over there. That's it.